"Sua, stay back. That human is mine." The alien woman snapped. Her own fleet refused her. Why would an alien woman claim a human so fiercely? Only for her own fleet to refuse her? What could make those closest to her reject such a direct command? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We are glad to have you here for another journey beyond the stars. If you enjoy emotional science fiction stories about humanity, courage, loyalty, and unexpected connections between worlds, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you sincerely for watching, supporting, and continuing this journey with us. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now, let us begin the story. "Nobody gets left behind while I can still fix the door," Ethan Cole said, and the alien evacuation officer stared at him as if humanity had just invented a new category of bad decision. The civilian transfer deck of Meridian Relay smelled of overheated circuitry and cold recycled air. Amber emergency lights swept across the metallic floor, while warning tones echoed through the station every 12 seconds. Beyond the observation windows, dozens of Varan warships hung against the stars, dark silver silhouettes surrounding the crippled relay like an enormous silent wall. Ethan should have been aboard Evacuation Shuttle 4. His name was already cleared. His seat was waiting. Instead, the 34-year-old rescue engineer knelt beside a disabled pressure door with half his tool kit spread across the floor. On the other side, 11 Varan civilians waited inside a transit chamber whose environmental controls were slowly losing power. "Human," the officer said, "the evacuation order applies to you." Ethan removed a diagnostic lead from the panel. "Good to know. Your shuttle departs in 6 minutes. Also good to know. You are not behaving like someone who knows." Ethan glanced through the transparent section of the door. A Varan mother stood with 2 children beneath the dim blue emergency lights. Their sapphire turquoise skin reflected faintly against the glass. One child held a small travel case against his chest and watched Ethan with enormous silver eyes. Ethan looked back at the officer. "They have a shuttle?" The officer hesitated. "Not yet." "Then neither do I." He returned to the panel. The lock controller had power, but its network authorization was dead. Typical station design, Ethan thought. A perfectly functional door waiting for a computer somewhere else to give it permission to become useful. He pulled a bypass connector from his belt. "You understand that Varan Command has ordered this sector abandoned?" the officer asked. "I understand the door is closed." "That is not the same thing. It is from where I am kneeling." Ethan bridged 2 contacts. The panel flashed green, then immediately returned to amber. "Come on, sweetheart. Are you speaking to the door?" Machines respond well to encouragement. That is scientifically unsupported. So is yelling, but every mechanic does that too. A new voice came from behind them. "And does the machine usually obey?" Ethan froze. The voice was low, controlled, unmistakably female, and somehow familiar. He turned. A tall Varan woman stood beneath the emergency lights wearing the dark uniform of Fleet Command. Her iridescent blue turquoise skin carried faint luminous markings along her temples, and her silver-violet eyes were fixed directly on him. 2 officers stood several steps behind her. Ethan recognized her before his tired mind supplied the name. Commander Soraya Vin. Months earlier, he had pulled her from a disabled diplomatic transport after a navigation failure near Europa Station. At the time, she had never mentioned commanding anything larger than herself. "Well," Ethan said, rising slowly, "this is awkward." Soraya's gaze moved from him to the trapped civilians, then to the open toolkit. "You were ordered to evacuate. People keep mentioning that. And yet you remain." Ethan nodded toward the sealed door. "So do they." Something shifted behind Soraya's eyes. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. She stepped closer to the panel. "How long?" "For minutes if the controller cooperates. 20 if it decides to express itself creatively." Her gaze settled on his face. "Your shuttle leaves in 5. Ethan returned to his knees and connected another bypass lead. "Then the door has 4 minutes to develop a better personality." For several seconds, Soraya said nothing. The station alarms continued their steady pulse. Metal hummed beneath Ethan's hands. Then the pressure lock clicked once. Green lights spread across the panel. The door opened, and 11 frightened civilians stared at the human who had just traded his safest exit for theirs. Ethan stood and waved them through. All right, folks, let us move. Soraya watched the civilians pass between them. When the last child crossed the threshold, he paused and gave Ethan a small Varen gesture of gratitude before following his mother. Ethan smiled. Then every communication screen on the deck changed simultaneously. A fleet priority message appeared in sharp, white letters. Human engineer Ethan Cole, detained for immediate security review. Ethan stared at his own name. That seems unfriendly. Soraya did not smile. Around them, her officers suddenly became very still. The order remained on every screen long enough for Ethan to wonder whether somebody had paid extra for dramatic timing. Human engineer Ethan Cole, detained for immediate security review. The 11 civilians he had just freed were already moving toward the evacuation corridor, but several looked back. Soraya's officers did not move at all. Ethan slowly disconnected his bypass leads and placed them inside his tool case. I assume security review is Varen for complimentary coffee and polite questions. Soraya kept her silver-violet eyes on the message. No. Worth asking. One of her officers touched the communicator at his collar. Commander, Fleet Security requests confirmation of detention. Soraya turned toward him. On what grounds? Restricted data access. Command reports that Cole recovered information from Relay Archive Node 7 approximately 20 minutes ago. Ethan stopped closing his tool case. Archive Node 7. He remembered it now. During the first system's failure, his diagnostic program had automatically copied a damaged recorder while he was trying to restore emergency navigation. He had barely looked at the recovered files. That recorder was attached to the evacuation network, Ethan said. I was repairing it. The officer regarded him without hostility, which somehow felt worse. Command considers the recovered material classified. Then somebody should stop connecting classified recorders to civilian emergency systems. Soraya's luminous temple markings brightened slightly. Ethan had learned months ago that this usually meant she was either irritated or trying not to show amusement. Tonight, he suspected both. Where is the data? She asked. Ethan tapped the diagnostic unit clipped to his belt. Probably in here. Her officers immediately focused on it. Ethan raised both hands. Easy. It is a repair tablet, not the crown jewels. Give it to me, Soraya said. Ethan studied her for half a second, then removed the unit and placed it in her hand. One officer frowned. Commander, Fleet Security ordered the device transferred directly to them. And I am ordering technical verification before transfer. Their instruction carries central authorization. Soraya looked at him. So does mine. Silence followed. The officer lowered his gaze. Understood. Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Soraya had bought him time, although he could not understand why. She turned toward the evacuation corridor. Walk. Am I detained? You are accompanying me voluntarily. And if I decline, then I will become less diplomatic. Ethan picked up his tool case. Voluntarily it is. They moved through the station while emergency lights washed the walls in amber. Soraya walked beside him, her officers several steps behind. Outside the windows, Varen ships remained motionless against the stars. Ethan could feel their presence more than see it. Thousands of people, dozens of vessels, one command structure suddenly interested in a civilian engineer from Ohio. You remembered me, Soraya said quietly. Hard to forget somebody who argued with rescue personnel while her shuttle was losing power. I was maintaining command authority. You were stuck behind a jammed hatch. Both statements can be true. Ethan smiled. There she is. Soraya glanced at him. You have not changed. I bought new boots. Your humor remains inconvenient. That was cheaper. They reached an empty operations room. Soraya sealed the door and connected Ethan's diagnostic unit to an isolated console. Lines of recovered data appeared. Most were damaged telemetry logs. Then one file opened automatically. Ethan's smile disappeared. The record showed fleet routing commands issued hours before the relay failure. Civilian evacuation lanes had been deliberately redirected away from functioning docks. Someone had known exactly which systems would fail. Soraya read the timestamps twice. This cannot be correct. I was hoping you would say that. Another entry appeared beneath it. Authorization source, Varen Central Fleet Command. Soraya became perfectly still. Ethan looked at her. I am guessing that is bad. It means this crisis may not have been an accident. Before he could answer, the room communicator activated. Commander Ven, security teams are approaching your position. Transfer the human and his device immediately. Ethan looked toward the sealed door. Then at Soraya. Still voluntary? Soraya removed the diagnostic unit from the console and placed it back into his hand. For the moment, the lights outside shifted from amber to deep red. If they wanted the truth protected, Ethan said, they would not be sending security to collect the only copy. Soraya's eyes shifted from the diagnostic unit in his hand to the sealed operations room door. Red emergency lights swept across her blue turquoise skin, turning the luminous markings at her temples almost violet. Outside, measured footsteps approached through the corridor. Not running. Whoever was coming expected obedience. Ethan disliked that more than panic. How many copies exist? Soraya asked. One complete recovery on my tablet. The original recorder is probably still attached to Archive Node 7. Probably. I was busy opening doors for civilians. Her gaze sharpened. Can the original prove these records were not altered? Ethan understood immediately. A copied file could be dismissed. A physical recorder with intact system signatures was harder to explain away. If the memory core survived, yes. Soraya touched the wall console. A station map appeared. Archive Node 7 sat almost half a mile away, across 2 evacuation sectors already marked restricted. Then we retrieve it. Ethan stared at her. That sounds suspiciously like helping a detained human avoid detention. You are still accompanying me voluntarily. I appreciate the legal craftsmanship. The communicator activated again. Commander Vin, open the door. Soraya did not answer. Instead, she opened a maintenance access panel at the rear of the room. Cold recycled air spilled through the narrow passage beyond. Ethan looked inside, then at his tool case. You know, when I rescued you near Europa, I remember the hallway being significantly wider. You complained then as well. Consistency builds trust. She entered first. Ethan followed, pulling the panel closed behind them. The maintenance passage smelled of metal dust and chilled insulation. Pipes ran inches above his head. Soraya moved with practiced control despite her formal fleet uniform. You have done this before, Ethan whispered. Commanders are required to understand their vessels. This is a civilian relay. I read the schematics. Ethan shook his head. Of course you did. They emerged 2 corridors away, beyond the security checkpoint. Evacuation traffic had thinned. Through a broad window, Ethan saw 3 civilian shuttles leaving Meridian Relay, while Varen ships maintained their silent formation. Why are you doing this? He asked. Soraya continued walking. Because the evidence requires verification. That is the commander answer. She stopped. Ethan nearly walked past her. You want another? Preferably one without a uniform. For a moment, the alarm seemed farther away. Soraya looked directly at him. Months ago, my diplomatic transport failed near Europa. Other vessels received our distress signal. They calculated fuel, jurisdiction, schedule delays, and political consequences. Ethan remembered the crippled shuttle rotating slowly above Jupiter's moon. You were not exactly friendly when I arrived. You entered a restricted diplomatic vessel carrying a wrench. It was a very good wrench. You opened the hatch anyway. Ethan shrugged. You needed help. Exactly. Her voice softened. You did not ask who I was until everyone was safe. Ethan had no clever answer for that. Soraya turned and resumed walking. Tonight, I intend to return the courtesy. They reached Archive Sector 7 with 8 minutes remaining before the station sealed secondary evacuation routes. Ethan found the damaged recorder exactly where he had left it, embedded in the emergency network housing. Its indicators still glowed faint green. Memory core is alive, he said. Good. He connected his diagnostic unit. Data began transferring. Soraya watched the corridor while Ethan verified the signatures. The timestamps matched. The routing commands matched. Then a hidden directory appeared beneath the evacuation logs. Ethan frowned. That was not in the first recovery. Open it. He did. A sequence of scheduled system interruptions filled the screen, each authorized before the crisis began. Meridian Relay had not suffered one unexpected failure. Someone had prepared several. At the bottom was a list of civilian sectors marked acceptable loss of access. Ethan felt the cold air differently now. Soraya. She stepped beside him. Her expression changed as she read. Then another line appeared. Commander Vin. Removed from operational authority upon security phase 2. Ethan slowly looked at her. Apparently, I am not the only person they want out of the way. Before Soraya could answer, Every light in Archive Sector 7 went dark. A calm, automated voice filled the black corridor. Command authorization revoked. Commander Soraya Vin, remain in place for reassignment. Ethan activated his emergency lamp. White light caught her face. For the first time since he had met her, she looked genuinely surprised. Then the sealed doors began locking around them. The locks are moving faster than the evacuation clock, Ethan said, sweeping his emergency lamp across the dark corridor. One pressure door had already sealed behind them. Another was descending ahead with the slow mechanical certainty of a system that believed nobody important remained inside. Soraya stepped toward it and raised her wrist interface. Commander authorization, Ven Soraya. Suspend sector lockdown. The panel flashed red. Authorization revoked. Ethan looked at her. That seems personal. It is procedural. Your face disagrees. Soraya ignored him and tried a second command. The result was identical. For perhaps the first time since Ethan had known her, the Varen commander possessed no rank the station was willing to recognize. He expected anger. Instead, she became very quiet. Ethan knew that kind of silence. Engineers made it when a machine had stopped responding to every normal solution and creativity was about to become expensive. How long before that door closes? He asked. 40 seconds. Ethan set down his tool case. Plenty of time. For what? Something scientifically unsupported. He removed a compact maintenance bridge and opened the access plate beside the door. Soraya watched him connect two leads. You are going to encourage the machine again. I was thinking of insulting it. Will that improve our chances? Morale matters. The door reached halfway down. Ethan found the local actuator circuit and bypassed central control. The motor paused. There. Soraya looked at the narrow opening. That is not open. You have extremely demanding standards. He adjusted the bridge. The door rose 3 feet, then stopped. Now. Acceptable. They ducked beneath it and entered the next corridor. Ethan retrieved his tools before the door sealed behind them. His diagnostic unit still held the verified recorder data. That little tablet suddenly felt heavier than his entire tool case. We need somewhere isolated, he said. No network connection. No fleet systems. Soraya brought up an offline map. Civilian maintenance bay 12. 200 yards. They moved quickly beneath emergency strips glowing along the floor. Ethan could hear security announcements spreading through nearby sectors. His name appeared first. Soraya's followed seconds later. You realize this is terrible for my reputation, he said. Your reputation survived entering my diplomatic transport with a wrench. Fair point. They reached maintenance bay 12 and sealed the manual door. The room smelled of coolant and old machinery. Ethan placed the recorder core beside his diagnostic unit and began comparing the original signatures. Soraya stood across from him, arms folded. Can they claim you fabricated it? They can claim anything. Proving it is harder. He expanded the verification record. Original timestamps. Hardware authentication. Independent emergency network logs. This is real. Soraya stared at the evidence. Then Central Fleet Command deliberately redirected civilian evacuation traffic and scheduled your removal. Yes. Ethan watched her carefully. You trusted them. It was not really a question. Soraya's gaze remained on the screen. I served beside some of those officers for 11 years. That is a long time. Long enough to believe loyalty traveled both directions. Ethan closed the verification window. Maybe loyalty and obedience are not the same thing. Her eyes lifted to his. Before she could answer, the wall communicator activated. Commander Van, surrender the human engineer and all recovered material. Your operational authority will be reviewed afterward. Ethan leaned toward Soraya. They really need to work on their negotiation style. The voice continued. Compliance will restore your command access immediately. Soraya became still. There it was. Her fleet. Her rank. 11 years of service offered back in exchange for one civilian human and a small diagnostic tablet. Ethan understood the equation immediately. He picked up the recorder core. You should take the deal. Soraya's markings brightened sharply. No. You can keep command, get civilians off the station, and investigate from inside the system. By handing them the evidence, and you. I am significantly less valuable than an entire fleet. Soraya stepped closer. Do not decide your value for my convenience. Ethan met her gaze. I am trying to give you options. Then give me useful ones. The communicator repeated the demand. Soraya reached over and switched it off. Silence filled the bay. Ethan looked at her hand resting beside the dark panel. You just refused Central Fleet Command. I delayed answering. That is impressively diplomatic. A faint smile touched her mouth and vanished. Then Ethan's tablet chimed. A civilian evacuation alert appeared. 3 shuttle bays had been closed under fleet authority. Hundreds of passengers were being redirected into one remaining sector. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Soraya read the notice over his shoulder. They are controlling movement, which means this is bigger than hiding one recorder. Another message appeared immediately beneath it. Security teams approaching Maintenance Bay 12. Ethan looked toward the sealed door. How much time? Soraya checked the corridor sensors. 2 minutes. Ethan lifted his tool case. Good. You consider 2 minutes good? He handed her the verified recorder core. Compared with 40 seconds, it feels luxurious. Soraya took it, but her expression remained serious. Ethan, from this moment forward, anyone helping you may be treated as disobeying fleet authority. Ethan opened the rear maintenance passage. Cold air touched his face. Then maybe we should make sure nobody has to help me. Soraya looked at him for a long second. You still do not understand. What? She stepped into the passage beside him, carrying the evidence her own command wanted erased. I already chose. You chose before you knew what it would cost, Ethan said, and Soraya answered without looking back. That is usually when a choice means something. The maintenance passage narrowed until Ethan had to turn sideways around bundles of coolant lines. Cold air moved through the metal channel, carrying the dry smell of insulation and machinery. Somewhere beyond the wall, Meridian Relay continued its evacuation countdown, each distant tone reminding him that Shuttle 4 had already departed without him. Soraya moved ahead with the recorder core secured inside her uniform pouch. Her fleet insignia still caught the emergency light, but the symbol felt different now. It represented an authority the station no longer recognized. Ethan checked his tablet. There is an auxiliary launch bay 60 yards below us. Soraya stopped. Bay 19. You know it. Command vessels use it for emergency transfers. Then congratulations. Your expensive education finally paid off. She gave him a flat look. I am beginning to understand why human rescue teams assigned you solitary maintenance work. They said independent operations. They were being kind. Ethan smiled despite himself. They climbed down a service ladder and emerged behind an equipment locker overlooking Bay 19. The space was almost empty. One compact escape pod remained connected to the launch rail, its white hull illuminated by blue floor lights. Ethan checked the status panel. Functional. Navigation is green. Life support is green. Soraya stepped beside him. Range. Enough to reach the civilian convoy. He looked at the passenger indicator. 2 occupants maximum. For the first time in several minutes, hope felt practical. Soraya entered a command sequence into the pod console. The hatch opened. Get inside. Ethan did not move. That sounded less like an invitation. It was not one. What about you? I will remain here. Ethan stared at her. The pod holds 2. The recorder core must leave this station. You must leave with it. That still leaves another seat. Soraya's gaze shifted toward the bay entrance. There are civilians being redirected through the lower transit sectors. Someone may need it more. Ethan almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the way she had said it. Hours earlier, Soraya would have spoken in numbers, priorities, command classifications. Now she was looking at an empty seat and imagining a stranger inside it. You have been spending too much time around humans, he said. Apparently, it is contagious. His tablet chimed. A civilian distress notice appeared from Transit Sector C. An elderly Varen passenger and her teenage grandson had been separated from their assigned shuttle group when the automated doors rerouted traffic. Bay 19 was listed as their nearest available emergency launch point. Ethan looked through the bay window. 2 distant figures appeared at the far corridor entrance, moving slowly toward them. Soraya looked at the pod, then at Ethan. Go. No. Ethan. There are 2 seats. Yes. And 2 people walking toward us. Her expression hardened. You have evidence that could expose what Central Command has done. Evidence fits in a pocket. He removed the recorder core from her pouch before she could object and placed it inside the pod's secure storage compartment. Then he activated the automatic destination lock for the civilian convoy. Now the evidence has transportation. Soraya understood. You are giving them the pod. We are giving them the pod. Your evacuation shuttle is gone. I noticed. The two civilians reached the bay. The older woman looked exhausted, while the younger Varen supported her carefully. Ethan guided them toward the open hatch. This will take you directly to the convoy. Do not change the navigation setting. The teenager looked at the two of them. What about you? Ethan glanced at Soraya. We have a commander. Soraya lifted one eyebrow. A commander without command authority. Details. The civilians boarded. Before the hatch closed, the older woman placed her hand against the glass in silent gratitude. Ethan returned the gesture. Seconds later, the pod slid from the rail and disappeared into the star-filled darkness. Soraya stood beside him, watching the empty launch cradle. You surrendered your last confirmed escape route. So did you. I had already chosen. Ethan looked at her. So did I. For a moment, neither spoke. Then every light in Bay 19 changed to white. A fleet transmission filled the room. Commander Van, your command privileges have been conditionally restored. Transfer Ethan Cole to security custody and return to your flagship immediately. Ethan slowly turned toward Soraya. There is your way out. Her silver-violet eyes remained fixed on him. No. Soraya, you can regain your fleet. At the price of handing them the person who uncovered the truth. You could investigate from inside. That is what you told me earlier. It was a good argument. It was a coward's bargain dressed as strategy. Ethan fell silent. The bay doors opened behind them. Several Varen officers entered, not threatening, merely waiting for their commander to make the decision Central Command expected. Soraya straightened. Her uniform suddenly seemed less like a symbol of authority and more like a question. Ethan stepped slightly away from her. Whatever you decide, do not do it because of Europa. She looked at him. You think I owe you. I think you believe you do. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then you still misunderstand humans and Varens alike. She removed the command insignia from her collar and placed it carefully on the empty launch console. The officers stared. Ethan felt the station hum beneath his boots. Soraya stepped beside him, leaving the insignia behind. I am not repaying a debt, she said quietly. I am deciding what kind of commander I was supposed to be. You left your insignia behind, Ethan said as the bay doors closed behind them. Soraya kept walking. I noticed. Most people misplace keys. Maybe a glove. Commanders usually keep track of the symbol representing 11 years of their lives. You speak frequently when nervous. I speak frequently when awake. That earned him the smallest sideways glance, and somehow it made the cold corridor feel less empty. They followed a narrow service route toward the relay's civilian communications spine, where Ethan hoped they could contact the evacuation convoy without passing through fleet-controlled channels. The station had grown quieter. Most passengers were gone now. Ventilation fans whispered behind the walls, emergency strips painted the floor pale blue, and every few seconds Ethan felt a vibration through his boots as another shuttle departed. Soraya walked without the rigid certainty she had carried earlier. Without the insignia at her collar, she seemed strangely more present, less like Commander Vin and more like the woman Ethan remembered from Europa, sitting beside a broken hatch while insisting she did not require assistance. Can I ask you something? She said. You just did. Why did you give away the pod? Ethan adjusted his tool case. There were 2 people and 2 seats. That explains the arithmetic. I am an engineer. Arithmetic is most of the magic. Soraya stopped beside a dark observation window. Beyond it, the civilian pod they had launched was already gone among the stars. You had no guarantee another escape route existed. Neither did they. You keep answering practical questions with moral ones. Ethan leaned against the wall. Maybe you keep separating things that are not separate. Her silver-violet eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Humans expect repayment for favors. Some do. Your governments exchange concessions. Your corporations exchange value. Your contracts define obligations. You have been reading about us extensively. That explains your pessimism. Her temple markings brightened faintly. Then what do you call what you did? Ethan considered the question. He could have dressed the answer in something noble. Courage, duty, sacrifice. Words people used afterward because ordinary choices looked cleaner from a distance. But inside Bay 19, there had only been an old woman, a frightened teenager, and 2 empty seats. Nothing, he said. Soraya stared at him. Nothing. They needed the pod. We had the pod. You surrendered your escape for nothing? No. They escaped. That was the point. For several seconds, Soraya said nothing. The station hummed around them. Ethan could almost hear her trying to fit his answer into some invisible equation. On Vera, she finally said, a life saved creates an obligation. Sounds exhausting. It creates order. Maybe. But if somebody helps me because I helped them first, that is accounting. He pushed away from the wall. Kindness should survive bad bookkeeping. Soraya remained still. And Europa? Ethan looked back. What about it? You rescued my crew without knowing our identities. You refused compensation afterward. Your diplomatic office offered me a ceremonial blade I was not legally allowed to bring through Earth customs. There were other options. I liked the thank you card. That was an official commendation. It had nice handwriting. A soft sound escaped her, almost a laugh. Ethan smiled and continued toward the communications spine. After several steps, Soraya joined him. You are an unusual species. There are 8 billion of us. You might want a larger sample. I am beginning to think one is already complicated enough. They reached the civilian communications room. Ethan opened the manual panel and began rerouting power. Soraya stood close enough that the faint glow from her skin reflected across his tools. Then his tablet chimed. A message had arrived through the civilian emergency network, transmitted from the pod they had surrendered. The recorder core had reached the convoy. Its verified data had automatically copied into the civilian rescue archive. Ethan looked at Soraya. The evidence is out. For the first time that night, relief softened her face. Then a second message appeared. Fleet Command has ordered all civilian archives sealed. Ethan's relief vanished. Soraya read the notice, and her expression became calm in a way Ethan had learned to distrust. They are afraid, she said. Of the evidence? Ethan asked. Soraya looked toward the distant silhouettes of her own warships beyond the glass. No, of everyone seeing it. They were never afraid of the recorder, Ethan said quietly. They were afraid somebody might decide for themselves. Soraya turned from the observation glass, silver-violet eyes reflecting the distant fleet. Then we give them that opportunity. Ethan studied her. Hours earlier, she had spoken like every sentence required authorization. Now the missing insignia at her collar seemed louder than any rank. That sounded dangerously human. Do not insult me. I meant it as a compliment. That is what concerns me. Ethan smiled and opened the civilian communications console. The machine answered with a low electrical hum, followed by 3 amber warnings. Central Fleet Command had sealed the primary archive channels, but Meridian Relay had been built for civilian emergencies. Emergency systems, Ethan had learned, were stubborn by design. They locked the front door, he said. Can you open another? Soraya asked. I am from Ohio. We consider door suggestions. He removed the access plate and traced the fiber lines beneath it. One channel connected directly to rescue beacons throughout the civilian convoy. It could transmit basic safety information, nothing larger. Ethan looked at the verification file. Too much data. Soraya leaned closer. Then do not send the data. What? Send the authentication signature. Ethan looked at her, then understood. Anyone already holding fragments of the copied archive could compare the signature and verify the records independently. Central Command could seal one archive, but not every civilian device that had touched the emergency network. That is clever. I command a fleet. Commanded. Soraya gave him a look cold enough to refrigerate the room. Ethan raised one hand. Too soon. Considerably. He compressed the authentication sequence and routed it through the rescue beacon channel. The console estimated 43 seconds. Soraya watched the corridor sensor while Ethan started transmission. You realize, he said, this makes your situation worse. My situation became worse when I discovered my command was willing to endanger civilians. You could still walk away. So could you. I gave away my ride. You would have stayed anyway. Ethan paused. You sound very confident. I have observed you. For one evening. It has been an unusually educational evening. The progress indicator reached 30%. Ethan could feel her standing beside him, close enough that the faint turquoise light of her skin colored the metal around his hands. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No declaration. Just 2 tired people listening to a machine carry the truth into the dark. Why did you really stay at Europa? Soraya asked. Ethan kept his eyes on the console. We covered this. You said I needed help. You did. That cannot be the entire answer. Ethan exhaled. When I was 19, my father told me something after a highway pileup outside Columbus. He said people spend their lives imagining they will recognize the important moments when they arrive. Soraya waited. He said usually you do not. Usually it just looks like somebody needs a hand. The transmission reached 68%. Your father was a rescue worker? Electrician. Then why was he at an accident? Ethan glanced at her. Somebody needed a hand. Soraya looked away, but the luminous markings along her temples softened into a pale blue. Ethan returned to the console. That is the problem with humans, she said. Only one. You make irrational behavior sound reasonable. We have had practice. The transmission reached 99%. Then the console flashed green. Authentication distributed. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then replies began appearing. One civilian ship confirmed verification. Then another. Then 7 more. The truth was spreading vessel by vessel beyond Central Command's control. Ethan felt Soraya's hand settle briefly on his shoulder, firm and grateful. You did it. He shook his head. We did. A new message interrupted the confirmations. This one carried Soraya's former command channel. All fleet personnel. Commander Venn is relieved of authority. Ethan Cole is to be transferred into security custody. Assistance to either will constitute insubordination. Soraya's hand left his shoulder. Ethan read the message twice. They are making everyone choose. Yes, she said. Footsteps sounded beyond the communications room door. Not one group this time. Many. Soraya stepped between Ethan and the entrance. He noticed the movement immediately. Soraya, stay behind me. That is becoming a habit. For once, Ethan, do exactly what I say. The door indicator changed from blue to white. Someone outside entered a command override. Soraya straightened despite having no insignia, no authorization, and no fleet officially willing to follow her. Ethan looked at the empty place on her collar and understood something she had not yet realized. She was still standing like a commander. The only difference was that now there was nothing left forcing anyone to obey. The door opened, and Ethan discovered that silence could be more unsettling than an alarm. 12 Varen officers stood in the corridor beneath white emergency lights, their dark uniforms perfectly ordered, their expressions carefully neutral. No one rushed forward. No one spoke. Soraya remained between them and Ethan, shoulders squared, the empty place on her collar plainly visible. A senior officer stepped forward. Ethan recognized him from Bay 19. Commander Venn. Soraya's voice stayed calm. I am no longer your commander, Lieutenant. The officer hesitated. Central Command requires Engineer Cole to accompany us. Ethan leaned slightly toward Soraya. A company? That sounds almost friendly. Ethan, right? Serious moment. The lieutenant looked past her. The civilian archives are receiving unauthorized authentication data. Command believes Cole is responsible. Command is correct, Ethan said. Soraya turned sharply. Do not help them. I am trying something new. Ethan stepped sideways until he could see the officers clearly. Soraya immediately matched the movement, keeping herself between him and the corridor. Would you stop doing that? He murmured. No. You are making this difficult. That is intentional. The lieutenant exhaled slowly. Engineer Cole, please come with us. Ethan looked at the faces behind him. Some were familiar. 2 had helped evacuate the civilians from the transit chamber. Another had guided the elderly woman toward Bay 19 before being reassigned. They were not strangers anymore. That made Ethan's decision easier. I will go, he said. Soraya turned. Absolutely not. Listen first. I have listened to enough human reasoning for one evening. That sounds healthy, but give me 30 seconds. Ethan lowered his voice. If they take me voluntarily, nobody here has to disobey an order because of me. And what happens to you? Security review, remember? Maybe the coffee improves. Her eyes narrowed. This is not amusing. I know. The humor left his voice. That is why I am going. Soraya stared at him. Behind her, nobody moved. Ethan could see the conflict in the faint shifting light along her temples. You distributed the evidence, she said. We distributed it. Do not correct me now. Bad timing. Remarkably, Ethan looked toward the officers. They have families, careers, people depending on them. If they refuse Central Command because you are standing here protecting me, every one of them pays for my decision. You did not create this situation. Neither did they. Soraya's expression changed. Ethan had seen that look earlier when she finally understood why he had surrendered the escape pod. "You are protecting them," she said. "I am trying not to make strangers choose between their conscience and their future." The lieutenant lowered his gaze for a moment. Ethan suspected the man had heard every word. Soraya stepped closer. "And my future?" Ethan looked at the empty place where her insignia had been. "You already chose that yourself." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Soraya said quietly, "You are infuriating. I have references." Something almost warm crossed her face and disappeared. Ethan moved toward the doorway. Soraya caught his sleeve. Not forcefully, just enough to stop him. "If you go with them, Central Command may isolate you before the verification spreads farther. Then keep it spreading. Without you." Ethan nodded toward the console. "You know how now." Her eyes followed his gesture. "You trust me with it. Soraya, you walked away from your fleet before you knew whether anybody would ever thank you for it. At this point, trusting you is probably the least irrational thing I have done tonight." Her hand slowly released his sleeve. Ethan stepped into the corridor. The officers moved aside rather than surrounding him. That detail mattered. The lieutenant gestured toward the transit lift. "This way." Ethan took 3 steps before Soraya called his name. He turned. She stood in the communications room doorway, framed by pale blue light, looking smaller without her fleet around her, and somehow stronger without its insignia. "Ethan," she said, "you told me kindness should survive bad bookkeeping. I remember. Then understand this clearly. I do not owe you." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good." Her markings brightened. "But I am still coming for you." The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. Ethan nodded once. "I figured." The lift doors opened. As Ethan stepped inside, his tablet vibrated in his pocket. Another civilian vessel had verified the archive. Then another. Then another. The lieutenant noticed the growing list, but said nothing. The doors began closing. Through the narrowing gap, Ethan saw Soraya turn back toward the communications console. She had lost her command code, her insignia, and the protection of her rank. Yet for the first time that night, Ethan understood why Central Command was truly afraid of her. Soraya no longer needed permission to decide what was right. The transit lift climbed in complete silence, and Ethan decided that being politely detained was somehow more uncomfortable than being chased. Lieutenant Arvin stood beside the control panel while the other officers faced forward, their expressions unreadable beneath the cold white ceiling lights. Ethan could feel his tablet vibrating inside his pocket every few seconds as another civilian vessel verified the archive. Nobody asked him to surrender it. That interested him. "You know I still have the tablet," Ethan said. Arvin kept his eyes on the floor indicator. "I know. Central Command forgot to mention it." Central Command mentioned many things. Ethan waited. That sounded almost like an opinion. The lieutenant finally looked at him. "Do not mistake restraint for agreement, Engineer Cole." "I would not dream of it." The lift passed Deck 21 without stopping. Ethan watched the numbers climb. Security processing was on Deck 24, but the lift continued toward the command transfer level. "We missed our floor. Your destination changed." "That usually happens after somebody asks me first." Arvin said nothing. Ethan looked through the narrow observation strip as Meridian Relay rotated beneath the distant stars. Varen warships filled the darkness beyond, perfectly arranged, perfectly disciplined. Then one vessel shifted position. Only a few degrees, but enough to break formation. A second followed. Ethan leaned closer to the glass. "Is that normal?" Arvin did not answer quickly enough. Ethan understood. They are reacting to the archive. Civilian verification has reached fleet crews. So your people are reading it too. Apparently. The lift stopped. The doors opened onto a broad command concourse where nearly 40 Varen personnel waited beneath silent displays. No one approached Ethan. Instead, they were watching the same message repeated across every screen. Commander Soraya Venn remains relieved of authority. All orders issued by her are invalid. Ethan read it twice. They really want everyone to remember that. Arvin's expression tightened. "Because some are forgetting." Ethan turned toward him. "How many?" Before the lieutenant could answer, the overhead communication system activated. Soraya's voice filled the concourse. Calm, clear, unhurried. "To every vessel receiving this transmission, I am not contacting you as your commander. Central Command has correctly stated that I possess no operational authority. Every face in the concourse lifted toward the speakers. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Soraya continued, I will issue no order. I will request no disobedience. I ask only that you examine the verified civilian records and decide whether the actions documented there represent the fleet you believed you served. The transmission ended. No dramatic declaration followed. No demand for loyalty. Just silence. Ethan smiled faintly. She learned fast. Arvin looked at him. From you. Do not tell her. She will become unbearable. Then the fleet display changed. One ship marked its command status as independent review. Another followed. Then 4 more. Nobody abandoned formation. Nobody threatened anyone. They simply stopped acknowledging Central Command's emergency directives until the records could be examined. Ethan watched the symbols change one by one. They are choosing, he whispered. Arvin's gaze remained fixed on the screen. Yes. A priority message suddenly appeared on his wrist interface. The lieutenant read it, and whatever uncertainty had been in his face disappeared beneath professional stillness. What happened? Ethan asked. Arvin turned the display toward him. Central directive. Transfer Ethan Cole to flagship custody immediately. Communication with Soraya Vin prohibited. Ethan exhaled. They are running out of subtle ideas. Arvin looked toward the officers around them. There is more. A second directive appeared. Any vessel refusing transfer orders will lose fleet access and command recognition. Ethan stared through the observation glass. More ships were changing status. Every one of them now faced the same choice Soraya had faced in Bay 19. Keep authority by surrendering someone else, or risk authority by refusing. Do not let them do this because of me, Ethan said. Arvin's eyes narrowed. You intend to cooperate. If going to the flagship keeps these crews from losing everything, yes. Soraya Vin will object. I have noticed she enjoys that. Ethan stepped toward the transfer corridor. Then every light in the concourse shifted from white to deep blue. A new fleet announcement appeared. Soraya Vin approaching command transfer level. Central Command orders all personnel to deny her access. Ethan stopped. Arvin looked toward the far doors. Nobody moved to seal them. Nobody moved to open them either. 40 officers simply stood waiting, caught between the command they had always obeyed and the woman who had asked them to think for themselves. Ethan heard footsteps approaching from the other side. Slow. Certain. Alone. The door indicator turned green. Soraya was coming, and this time she had no rank left to protect either of them. The doors opened, and Soraya walked into a room where everyone had been ordered to reject her. Ethan had expected hesitation in her stride. There was none. She crossed the command concourse beneath blue emergency lights, alone and without insignia, while 40 Varen officers watched in absolute silence. Her silver-violet eyes found Ethan immediately. For one brief second, the hard control in her expression softened. Then she saw the transfer notice glowing above him. You agreed to go, she said. Ethan lifted one shoulder. It seemed efficient. You promised nothing of the kind. Technically, I promised very little tonight. Soraya stopped several feet away. You intend to surrender yourself, so these crews retain fleet recognition. That is the general idea. It is a terrible idea. I have had worse. Lieutenant Arvin stepped forward. Central Command has ordered immediate transfer to the flagship. Soraya looked at him. And you intend to comply? Arvin's jaw tightened. You no longer have authority to ask me that. Correct. She nodded once. Then I am asking as Soraya Vin. The distinction settled over the concourse. Ethan saw officers exchange uncertain glances. Nobody seemed comfortable with a world where rank no longer supplied the answer. The overhead speakers activated. Transfer team entering command level. All personnel will stand aside. The far doors opened. A group of fleet security officers entered, calm and disciplined, led by a senior commander Ethan did not recognize. Engineer Cole, the commander said, you will accompany us. Ethan stepped forward. Soraya moved with him. Soraya, no. We discussed this. You spoke. I rejected your reasoning. That is not technically a discussion. The senior commander stopped. Former Commander Vin, stand aside. Soraya did not move. The civilian records have been independently authenticated. That matter is under review. Then there is no justification for isolating the person who recovered them. This does not concern you. Something changed in Soraya's face. Not anger exactly. Certainty. She stepped directly between Ethan and the transfer team. Her luminous markings brightened against the blue light. Stay back. That human is mine. Ethan blinked. We are definitely discussing that wording later. Nobody laughed. The senior commander stared at her. You possess no command authority. I am aware. Then your statement carries no operational weight. Soraya's shoulders remained square. I was not speaking operationally. Ethan felt 40 pairs of eyes shift between them. The senior commander looked toward Arvin. Lieutenant, remove her from the transfer path. Arvin stood motionless. Soraya turned slightly, and for an instant Ethan thought the lieutenant might choose her. Instead, Arvin lowered his eyes. I cannot follow your instruction, Soraya. The words were quiet, but they landed harder than any alarm. Soraya's expression barely changed. Another officer spoke from behind him. Neither can I. Then another. Central Command remains recognized authority. Soraya looked across the personnel who had once served beneath her. One by one, they refused to support her claim over Ethan. Nobody was cruel. Nobody threatened her. They simply would not follow. Ethan saw the realization reach her slowly. She had walked into the room believing loyalty might remain after authority disappeared. Now she stood alone between him and the fleet she had commanded. The senior commander extended one hand toward Ethan. Engineer Cole. Ethan looked at Soraya. Her face remained composed, but the glow along her temples had dimmed almost completely. He remembered Europa, the broken diplomatic shuttle, the proud alien commander who had hated needing help. He remembered Bay 19, where she had abandoned her insignia rather than trade him for power. Ethan stepped out from behind her. All right, he said. Soraya turned sharply. Ethan, do not. He moved until he was standing beside her, not behind her. You tried. That is insufficient. Maybe. He looked around the concourse at the silent officers. But this part was never supposed to be your choice alone. Soraya stared at him. Ethan then faced the senior commander. I will come voluntarily under one condition. You are not positioned to negotiate. Probably not. Still going to try. He removed his tablet and held it where everyone could see. Before I go, every verified record on this device gets transmitted to every civilian review board and every fleet vessel willing to receive it. No edits. No accusations. Just the original data. The senior commander's expression tightened. Ethan understood immediately. That was the first answer he had received all night that mattered. Soraya had lost her fleet, but the truth had just found something authority could not command: an audience. You are not protecting me anymore, Ethan said quietly. You are protecting the truth. Soraya looked at him as though the distinction offended her. The command concourse remained perfectly still around them, washed in cold blue light, while Ethan held his tablet between himself and the senior commander. Beyond the observation glass, the fleet floated against the stars like pieces on a board waiting for someone else to make the next move. Your condition is denied, the senior commander said. Ethan nodded. I expected that. Then surrender the device. That was less likely. Soraya stepped closer. Ethan. He heard the warning in her voice, but also something else. She thought he was about to sacrifice himself for her again. Ethan turned the tablet so only she could see the screen. Remember the civilian beacon network? Her eyes narrowed. Yes. I built a delayed relay into the authentication packet. Understanding moved across her face. You planned this. I am an engineer. We call it redundancy. Around the time everyone started becoming unusually interested in my repair tablet, a countdown glowed on the screen. 47 seconds. Ethan had configured the relay to release every verified file automatically unless he canceled it. The senior commander noticed the display. What have you done? Ethan faced him. Nothing irreversible yet. Cancel the transmission. I will, if you guarantee an independent civilian review and restore unrestricted evacuation access. The commander's expression remained controlled. You are attempting to dictate fleet policy. No. I am offering you 40 seconds to stop making this harder. Soraya almost smiled. Almost. The countdown reached 35. Lieutenant Arvin looked toward the surrounding officers. Ethan saw uncertainty moving through the room, but he did not want them choosing between Soraya and Central Command. That was the trap. So he changed the question. Nobody here has to follow her, Ethan said. Nobody has to follow me either. Read the records. Decide what they mean. That is all. The senior commander stepped toward him. Your interpretation is irrelevant. Exactly. Ethan held out the tablet. That is why I am sending the originals. 23 seconds. Soraya looked at him. If you transmit everything, some records may implicate my command decisions before the crisis. Ethan knew. He had seen references to her authorization codes in earlier routing logs. Context might clear her eventually, but releasing everything meant refusing to protect her reputation by hiding inconvenient facts. Yes, he said. Then why are you doing it? Because if I remove anything that makes you look bad, the truth becomes another favor. Her markings dimmed to a soft turquoise. Ethan lowered his voice. You do not need me to make you innocent, Soraya. You need everyone to see enough to decide for themselves. 10 seconds. The senior commander raised his communicator. Block all civilian channels. An officer at the console hesitated. Sir, the relay has already propagated beyond station control. 7 seconds. Another voice came from across the concourse. My vessel received the packet. Then another. So did mine. For seconds, Soraya stood beside Ethan, watching him with an expression he could not quite name. Not gratitude. Something quieter. Respect without debt. The countdown reached 0. Ethan's tablet chimed once. Transmission complete. Across the observation window, fleet status lights began changing. Not dramatically. One ship at a time. Civilian review requested. Independent verification requested. Emergency restrictions questioned. The senior commander stared at the displays. Ethan handed him the tablet. Now you can have it. Soraya blinked. You surrendered the device. It finished its job. And now they can take you. Ethan looked toward the transfer corridor. Maybe. Soraya moved in front of him again. Ethan sighed. We really need to discuss your positioning habits. Later, Lieutenant Arvin suddenly stepped away from the transfer path. The officer beside him followed. Then another. They did not move toward Soraya. They did not salute her. They simply cleared space beside her instead of behind Central Command. Arvin looked directly at Ethan. The records require review before any transfer can be considered legitimate. The senior commander turned. Lieutenant, that is a direct refusal. Arvin shook his head. No, sir. It is a request for lawful verification. Around the concourse, more officers quietly stepped aside. Soraya watched them, stunned. They were not obeying her. That was the point. Ethan leaned toward her. Looks like your fleet learned the difference. Between what? She whispered. Ethan watched another ship request independent review. Obedience and loyalty. They are not choosing me, Soraya said, watching the fleet status board change vessel by vessel. Ethan stood beside her beneath the pale blue lights of the command concourse. That is what makes it matter, he replied. Lieutenant Arvin remained several feet away, no longer blocking the transfer path, and no longer waiting for Soraya to tell him where to stand. Across the room, officers opened independent verification channels, compared authentication signatures, and requested civilian oversight. Nothing about it looked dramatic. No cheers. No grand declarations. Just professionals reading evidence and quietly refusing to pretend they had not seen it. The senior commander looked around the concourse as if the architecture itself had betrayed him. All personnel will return to assigned duties under Central Command authority. Arvin answered carefully. We remain at our duties, sir. Emergency operations continue. Then execute the transfer order. The legal basis of that order is under review. The senior commander's expression tightened. By whose authority? Arvin glanced toward Soraya, then deliberately looked away from her and toward the civilian verification display. By ours. Ethan felt Soraya become completely still beside him. That single word accomplished what every argument had failed to do. Her people were not returning to her command. They were discovering responsibility without it. Ethan leaned closer. You all right? I do not know. That is refreshingly honest. She gave him a sideways look. Do not become accustomed to it. The main display chimed. Civilian evacuation restrictions suspended pending independent review. A second notice followed. Security transfer of Ethan Cole suspended. Ethan exhaled slowly. There goes the complimentary coffee. You seem devastated. I was emotionally prepared. More messages appeared. 3 fleet captains requested a joint review board. 2 civilian rescue vessels offered complete copies of the recovered archive. The evidence was now distributed across so many independent systems that hiding it would require convincing thousands of people to forget what they had already seen. Soraya looked through the observation glass at the ships beyond. For 11 years, I believed command meant being the person who carried the certainty everyone else required. Ethan rested his hands against the cool railing. That sounds exhausting. It was efficient. There is that word again. Her luminous markings shifted softly along her temples. Tonight, I gave an order, and my own fleet refused me. Ethan did not soften the truth. They did. I thought that meant I had lost them. Maybe you lost something else. Soraya turned toward him. What? The idea that loyalty means people agreeing because you outrank them. Before she could respond, footsteps approached. Several officers entered from the evacuation corridor. Ethan recognized two immediately. They were among the personnel who had helped guide civilians from the transit chamber earlier. None approached Soraya for instructions. Instead, one addressed Arvin. All remaining civilians are accounted for. Shuttle access has been restored. Another officer added. 3 vessels have volunteered additional transport capacity. Volunteered. Ethan noticed Soraya react to the word. Arvin nodded. Proceed. The officers turned to leave, but one paused near Soraya. She was young, with pale sapphire skin and tired silver eyes. Former commander. Soraya straightened automatically. Officer. The young Varen hesitated. My family was in Transit Sector C. Ethan remembered the elderly woman and her grandson. They reached the convoy, she continued. I know. Her gaze moved briefly to Ethan. They told me why. Ethan looked down, suddenly interested in a scratch on the railing. The pod had 2 seats. The officer gave a small, almost disbelieving smile. That is what my grandmother said you would say. Soraya looked at Ethan. He shrugged. Your species apparently shares information aggressively. The officer turned back to Soraya. I refused your order earlier. You had that right. I know. She paused. I am still choosing to help with the review. Soraya's voice softened. Then do it because you believe it is right. I am. The officer left. Soraya watched her disappear down the corridor. Ethan said nothing. He knew better than to fill certain silences. Outside, one of the warships moved from its rigid formation and repositioned beside a civilian rescue vessel, providing navigation support without waiting for Central Command approval. Then another followed. Soraya's eyes reflected their distant lights. They are acting without orders, she whispered. Terrifying, is it not? Ethan said. A little. He smiled. Welcome to humanity. She looked at him, and this time her smile arrived without resistance. Then the main console sounded once more. A final notice appeared across the fleet network. Central Command Emergency Authority suspended. Independent review commencing. Commander Soraya Venn status pending. Ethan read the last line. Looks like they have not decided what to do with you. Soraya looked toward the ships, choosing their own positions among the stars. For the first time tonight, she said, I think I can live with that. 3 days later, Meridian Relay no longer sounded like a place waiting to fail. The alarms were silent. Ventilation moved warm recycled air through repaired corridors. Civilian traffic had returned, and beyond the observation glass the Varen fleet no longer held its perfect formation. Ships rested beside rescue vessels in loose groups, exchanging supplies and investigation teams beneath the quiet stars. Ethan stood at the same window where the crisis had begun, holding a paper cup of coffee that had somehow managed to taste worse than emergency rations. You were right, Soraya said behind him. Ethan turned. She approached in a simple dark uniform, without command insignia. The independent review had cleared her of involvement in the deliberate system failures, but her reinstatement remained undecided. She appeared surprisingly comfortable with that. I am right about many things, Ethan said. You will need to be more specific. The coffee. Humanity's most reliable disappointment. Soraya joined him at the glass. For several moments they watched workers move between the station and the fleet. Central Command's emergency authority had been suspended. Civilian review boards now held copies of the recovered records, and several senior officials had been removed from operational duties while the investigation continued. Nothing had been solved neatly. Ethan trusted neat endings less than functioning doors. There is something I need to correct, Soraya said. That sounds dangerous. Her silver-violet eyes remained on the stars. When the transfer team approached you, I said you were mine. Ethan took a careful sip of coffee. I remember. Mostly because I have been saving several excellent jokes about it. Do not. Cruel. Soraya finally looked at him. You were never mine to command. The humor left Ethan's expression. Her luminous markings glowed softly turquoise in the reflection of the window. Neither were they, she continued, looking toward the ships. For 11 years, I thought leadership meant becoming indispensable to every decision. I believed loyalty was proven when people followed. And now, she watched one Varen cruiser shift position to make room for a civilian transport. No order preceded the movement. The crews simply coordinated and acted. Now I think loyalty matters most when people are free to leave. Ethan nodded slowly. That sounds inconveniently human. I was afraid you would say that. We have jackets. A quiet laugh escaped her. Then she reached into a pocket and placed something on the railing between them. Her old command insignia. Ethan recognized the silver symbol immediately. They offered it back, he asked. This morning. And I accepted reinstatement under one condition. Civilian emergency authority can no longer be overridden by fleet command without independent review. Ethan looked at her. That probably made the meeting longer. Considerably. So you are Commander Ven again. Soraya picked up the insignia, but did not attach it to her collar. Yes. Congratulations. Thank you. Silence returned, comfortable this time. Below them, a small civilian shuttle crossed the window. Ethan recognized its identification number. Bay 19's escape pod had been recovered and returned to service. Somewhere aboard the station, an elderly Varen woman and her grandson were preparing to continue their journey. Ethan smiled at the thought. Soraya noticed. What? Nothing. You use that word for important things. Maybe. She studied him for a moment. What will you do now? Ethan lifted his coffee. Find whoever designed this beverage dispenser and request an independent review. After that, he looked toward the repaired station. There are still doors that stick. Soraya shook her head. Of course there are. She finally fastened the insignia to her collar. It looked different to Ethan now. Smaller somehow. Not because it meant less, but because neither of them confused the symbol with the person wearing it anymore. Outside, the fleet began departing one ship at a time. No rigid formation. No single perfect line. Just hundreds of lights choosing the same direction across the dark. Soraya stood beside Ethan rather than ahead of him. You know, she said quietly, when you entered my shuttle near Europa, I thought humans were reckless. You were correct. Then I thought you were impossible. Also correct. Now I think I understand. Ethan glanced at her. Understand what? Soraya watched the last rescue vessel join the departing fleet. Why you keep opening doors? Ethan looked through the glass at all those distant lights, then down at his scarred old tool case resting beside his boots. He had never wanted command. He had never asked anyone to follow him. He had only seen people who needed a hand and decided not to walk past. Somehow, that had been enough. Soraya said nothing more. Neither did he. And together, the human engineer and the alien commander watched the stars make room for everyone.